Language is more than sound, more than the shaping of words, more than the shifting of air from the lungs to the lips. Language is identity. Language is memory. Language is history carved into breath. And for the Black world, for the African diaspora scattered across continents, languages once carried the wisdom of entire civilizations. They carried the rhythm of the land, the values of ancestors, and the instructions for how communities survived, prospered, and built kingdoms that stood the test of time. When you understand the language of your people, you don't just communicate, you connect. You connect to stories bigger than you, to roots deeper than you know, and to a strength that was passed down long before your name ever existed. This is why language is not just a tool, it is a key. And for Black identity, it is the key that unlocks everything we were, everything we lost, and everything we must become again. There was a time when African languages flowed freely like rivers across the continent, from the rolling tones of Yoruba to the deep resonance of Wolof, from the ancient tongues of the Nile Valley to the melodic patterns of Swahili. Language shaped how people saw themselves and how they understood the world. In those languages lived philosophies, scientific knowledge, agricultural wisdom, medical understanding, political systems, family structures, and artistic traditions. Language was the vessel that carried the soul of Africa. It taught children who they were and gave elders the words to guide the community. Generations moved forward with purpose because the language itself reminded them who they were supposed to be. Then came a history that no community should ever have to endure. A history that tore people from their homelands, stripped them of their names, and tried to silence the languages that had shaped their identity for centuries. When languages were taken, the world didn't just lose words, it lost entire libraries of understanding. It lost ways of thinking that had built empires and preserved wisdom. It lost the stories that held families together, the proverbs that shaped character, the melodies and intonations that carried pride. And even though oppression could break chains and scatter people, it could not erase the deep memory held in the human spirit. It could not silence what was encoded into the minds of generations. Even when African people were forced to learn new languages, the rhythm of their original tongues shaped the way they spoke. The pulse of Africa survived in every syllable, every melody, every unique sound. That is proof that language cannot be destroyed. It can only be buried, waiting for a generation brave enough to dig it back up. Today, many people wonder why identity feels uncertain, why there is a searching, a longing, a hunger for roots that seem hidden, why so many across the African world feel disconnected from their origin. It is because identity comes from language. When you lose the words of your ancestors, you lose more than sentences, you lose the foundation of self. You lose the connection to a worldview that once guided every step. You lose the meaning of your own cultural DNA. Language carries values, behavior, tradition, respect, unity, and understanding. Without it, you may know your skin but not your story. You may know your name but not your lineage. You may know your present but not your purpose. The beautiful truth is that language can be reclaimed. Identity can be rebuilt. The past is not lost. It is waiting. Every African language still spoken today is an invitation to reconnect. The more you learn, the more you speak, the more you understand, the more you reclaim. And even if you never master the language of your ancestors, understanding the spirit of it still strengthens your identity. African languages are not just words. They are rhythms that live in the diaspora's music, dances, slang, and expression. They are the heartbeat behind the way Black people around the world communicate. They show up in the way stories are told, how humor is shared, how emotion is expressed. The tone patterns, speech rhythms, and creative wordplay are living evidence that Africa is still alive in Black voices everywhere. Language rebuilds identity by reminding you that you are not disconnected. You come from a people who created some of the world's earliest writing systems. You come from scholars who debated philosophy long before the Western world wrote its first textbooks. You come from communities where stories were so valuable that elders memorized thousands of years of knowledge and passed it down through language. You come from civilizations where language was the foundation of leadership, spirituality, culture, and innovation. And this same power still flows through you. You do not speak like everyone else, because your voice carries the imprint of those who came before you. The future of Black identity depends on honoring that voice, strengthening it, and reconnecting with the languages that shaped it. The future depends on teaching young people the origins of their speech, instead of allowing the world to tell them their language is broken or it is not inferior. It is adaptive. It is creative. It is ancient genius expressed in modern form. When a people lose their identity, they lose direction. But when they reclaim their language, even in small ways, they begin to rebuild from the inside out. They begin to see themselves with clarity. They begin to move with confidence. They understand that their story did not begin in chains. It began in kingdoms, and language was the crown. To rebuild Black identity, we must reclaim the pride that comes from knowing where your voice comes from. That pride reminds you that you are not a shadow of your ancestors. You are their continuation. Their words may have been stolen, but their brilliance survived in every rhythm and tone carried across oceans. You carry their resilience every time you speak. You carry their retentivity every time you shape a sentence in your own unique way. You carry their memory in your expression, communication, and understanding. Language is not just something you speak, it is something you inherit. Rebuilding Black identity through language also means honoring the diversity within Black culture. There is no single African language. There are thousands. Every one of them carries its own history, philosophy, and worldview. This diversity is not a weakness. It is a strength. It means Black identity is not a small box. It is an entire universe of sound, meaning, and expression. When people reconnect with their linguistic roots, they expand their understanding of themselves and of each other. They realize that Blackness is not one story, it is endless stories woven together through language. The journey to reclaim language does not require perfection, it requires willingness, it requires curiosity, it requires the courage to ask questions about where you come from and who you are. Every step, whether learning a single word, or an entire language, brings you closer to the foundation of your identity. And when a people understand their identity, they become unstoppable. They move differently. They walk with purpose. They lead with knowledge. They create with confidence. They understand that they do not need validation because their story already proves their worth. Language unlocks belonging. It unlocks pride. It unlocks memory. It unlocks purpose. And when Black people embrace the languages of their ancestors, they rebuild themselves from the inside out. They restore what history tried to erase. They reclaim what generations were denied. They return to a truth that has always been waiting for them. So when you speak, remember this. You are not just using words. You are carrying history. You are carrying culture. You are carrying identity. And the more you honor your voice, the more you rebuild the identity that was meant to guide your future. You do not need permission to reclaim it. You do not need approval to reconnect with it. The key is already within you. Your language is your inheritance, your strength, and your reminder that no matter what the world attempted to erase, your identity remains unbroken, waiting for you to claim it. They knew that taking your language was the quickest way to break the bridge between you and your own power. They understood that words are not just sounds, they are memory, they are direction, they are the map your ancestors left for you. When a people lose their language, they lose the rhythm of who they were before the world told them what they should be. And for centuries, that was the strategy used against Black people across the globe. Break their speech, break their unity, break their confidence, break the thread that connected them to the greatness they came from. They stripped away the tones, the proverbs, the stories, and the meanings that once carried the identity of empires. But even after everything, the remarkable truth is this: the language inside you was never fully erased. It simply hid itself within your creativity, your slang, your music, your humor, your way of expressing life. You are still speaking fragments of your ancestors without even knowing it. Every unique rhythm in your voice, every inventive way you bend words, every phrase born from struggle and turned into culture is a living reminder that they never truly stole what matters most. The identity they tried to silence found new ways to speak. And reclaiming it now is not about learning ancient words you've never heard before. It's about understanding the power of the voice you already have. Your voice carries a pulse that did not come from books or classrooms, but from generations who refused to let their essence disappear. When you reclaim your language, you reclaim the ability to define yourself, instead of being defined by history's distortions. Taking back your identity begins the moment you realize your speech has value. The way you talk is not broken. It is not improper. It is not less. It is the echo of survival. It is the evolution of brilliance under pressure. It is the proof that even when language was taken from your ancestors, the genius within them adapted, transformed, and waited inside you for the moment you would recognize. Reclaiming language means honoring the roots while shaping the future. It means recognizing that African languages were once the heartbeat of philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, music, and spiritual insight. It means understanding that when you speak with depth, creativity, and emotion, you are carrying forward a tradition older than pyramids. And when you begin to reconnect through learning, through culture, through awareness, you ignite something powerful inside. You unlock a strength that tells you who you are without needing permission, approval, or validation. The greatest act of reclaiming is this: refusing to let the world define your worth. When you know where your voice comes from, no one can make you ashamed of it. When you know the history of your speech, you no longer bow to those who mocked it. When you understand the intentional brilliance behind your way of speaking, you stop trying to change it just to fit into systems that were never built for you. You rebuild identity every time you speak boldly, every time you honor your roots, every time you choose to embrace what your ancestors fought to preserve. And this journey of reclaiming is not about rejecting the languages you speak now. It's about recognizing that every language you touch becomes more powerful in your hands. It is about remembering that your tongue has been shaped by resilience, not defeat. It is about knowing that the future of Black identity begins with the confidence to speak without apology. Because identity is not something they can give back to you, it is something you rise up and take for yourself. And once you reclaim it, once you stand firm in the truth of who you are, no force in this world can ever silence your voice again. They knew there was something dangerous about African languages, something so powerful that the world feared what would happen if Black people ever understood what was taken from them. These languages were never just tools for communication. They were systems of knowledge, blueprints for civilization, codes for memory, and bridges between mind, culture, and spirit. Every tone carried philosophy, every rhythm carried history, every proverb carried wisdom older than empires. When outsiders encountered African languages, they saw complexity they couldn't decode, depth they couldn't imitate, and meaning they couldn't control. And because of that, the easiest way to weaken a people was not to break their bodies, but to separate them from the sound of their own power. Colonizers banned African tongues, mocked them, criminalized them, and replaced them with foreign words, hoping that once the language collapsed, the identity, confidence, and unity of the people would collapse with it. But what they didn't understand was that the power of these languages was not limited to vocabulary. The power lived inside the people themselves. Even when forced to abandon their mother tongues, the descendants of Africa carried the rhythm, the tonal memory, and the creative genius of those languages in their DNA. That is why Black speech around the world evolved differently. It carried musicality, code-switching ability, layered meaning, symbolic expression, and emotional truth that no other culture could replicate. It is why African American vernacular English, Caribbean patois, Afro-Latin dialects, and urban slang are not broken versions of anything. They are reawakened versions of what was nearly taken. That linguistic spark survived the ships, the chains, the separation, and the shame. The world tried to bury it, but the spirit of those languages kept rising through song, rhythm, storytelling, dance, poetry, and innovation. When you hear a beat drop and see how naturally Black people move to it, you are witnessing the memory of drum languages that once communicated across villages miles apart. When you hear a Black storyteller bring a room to life with voice alone, you are witnessing the return of the griots, living libraries who carried entire histories in their speech. When you hear slang evolve at a pace the world can't keep up with, you are witnessing the rebirth of languages that adapted to survive anything. The world never wanted you to rediscover this because language is power. When you know your linguistic roots, no one can convince you that you are inferior. When you understand that your ancestors spoke languages that shaped mathematics, astronomy, governance, and art, you walk different. When you recognize that African languages influence the structure of language across continents, you stop apologizing for the way you talk. The world feared what would happen if black people learned that their languages were advanced, intentional, and foundational. But the truth is rising again, and it cannot be stopped. The accents they mocked were echoes of ancestral brilliance. The slang they dismissed was a survival strategy turned into culture. The rhythms they underestimated were the heartbeat of civilization. And when you begin to reclaim even fragments of the languages that belong to your lineage, something awakens inside you. It is a sense of knowing that does not need permission. It is the feeling of returning to yourself. It is confidence rooted in truth, not validation. Rediscovering this linguistic power means understanding that you are not disconnected from your ancestors. You are their continuation. You are the proof that what they built cannot be erased. You carry within you the tones of kingdoms, the cadence of storytellers, the rhythm of warriors, and the imagination of creators who turn sound into science. And once you recognize this, you cannot be manipulated by narratives meant to belittle who you are. You begin to appreciate the depth of your voice, the heritage in your speech, and the brilliance in your expression. Because the greatest secret of all is this: the world feared your languages not because they were primitive, but because they were powerful. And now that the truth is returning, the next chapter of Black identity will be written by those who reclaim the sound of their ancestors and speak with the confidence of a people who were never meant to disappear. You are not rediscovering a lost language. You are rediscovering yourself. Your voice carries more history than any book, more memory than any archive, and more truth than any classroom that tried to erase where you come from. Even if you've never stepped foot on African soil, even if you can't speak a single African language, even if your family tree was cut, burned, or scattered, the power of your ancestors still lives through the way you speak today. The tone in your voice carries the same rising and falling patterns found in Yoruba, Igbo, Wolof, Twi, Amharic, and hundreds of African languages, where sound was never just sound. It was meaning, emotion, rhythm, and identity. The way you stretch a word to add emphasis, the way you let your voice rise when you're excited, the way you drop your tone when you're serious, and the way you naturally layer expression on top of every sentence are not random habits. They are inherited patterns, linguistic fingerprints passed down from ancestors who used tone like a musical instrument, who communicated through rhythm, who taught entire communities through spoken art long before the world wrote its first alphabet. When you speak with passion, when your slang bends rules and creates new ones, when your expressions turn simple sentences into storytelling, you are doing something that your ancestors mastered generations ago. Every joke you crack with perfect timing, every metaphor you create without thinking, every playful twist of language that your community understands even without explanation, these are echoes of a culture built on oral genius. That's why African-descended communities around the world invent new words faster than anyone else. That's why slang born in Black communities becomes global language within years. That's why people copy the way you speak but can never replicate the soul behind it. They imitate the style but not the depth. They can learn the words but not the inheritance that shaped them. Because what lives inside your speech is older than the plantation, older than colonization, older than slavery, older than the borders that divided Africa into pieces that never belonged. Your voice is a time capsule carrying the memory of kingdoms that spoke in proverbs, villages that communicated through drums, and storytellers who preserved history not by writing but by living their words out loud. That is why even after centuries of forced silence, something inside you still rises when you speak. The world tried to cut the language from your ancestors' tongues, but it could not cut the language from your spirit. The rhythm survived, the creativity survived, the cadence survived, the confidence survived. Even when African languages were banned, mocked, suppressed, or rewritten, the children of Africa adapted, bending English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic into new forms that carried the old. That is why your slang doesn't follow the rules. It creates rules. That is why your expressions don't translate literally, they hold layers of meaning. That is why your tone communicates emotion even without words. It is a skill older than Western linguistics. You are not speaking improper. You are speaking inherited brilliance. You are not speaking street. You are speaking survival. You are not being dramatic. You are carrying the performance traditions of griots, who turn speech into an art form. You are not being too expressive. You are echoing ancestors who understood that voice is power. And the more you reconnect with this truth, the more you will stop apologizing for how you naturally speak. The world conditioned Black people to believe that intelligence required silence, that professionalism required erasing your natural tone, that success required abandoning the language patterns encoded in your DNA. But the moment you stop shrinking your voice, the moment you stop softening your dialect, the moment you embrace the rhythm and tone that come naturally to you, something unlocks inside you. You begin to speak with the confidence of someone who remembers where they come from even without knowing the full story. You begin to realize that your voice is not an accident, it is your inheritance. Your slang is not ignorance, it is innovation. Your expression is not exaggeration, it is culture. And your tone is not attitude, it is ancestry. When you speak, you are proving that your identity survived everything designed to erase. You are the living continuation of a linguistic legacy that crossed oceans, endured brutality, rebuilt itself in new lands, and still stands strong today. No matter how far removed you feel from your roots, your voice is the bridge that connects you to a lineage of greatness. It is the one thing they could never fully strip away because it lives in your blood, in your breath, in the way you shape sound without thinking. So speak boldly, speak creatively, speak truthfully, speak in the way that feels natural to you every time you open your mouth. Africa rises again.